Chinese is a very cultural, rich language. It's a language that you cannot learn it thoroughly without also learning its culture and history. If you want to reach native speaker level, you're gonna have to spend at least like a decade, I think. 就比如说 like how to say I'm shocked. 中文里可能有10多个方法。Like you can say 震惊、吃惊、大吃一惊、惊艳、震撼、吓一跳. Like there's so many ways to say it. And that's not only for the word shocked, like that's for a lot of words.
In this video, I interviewed a blogger in China about how he learned Mandarin. What's the story behind learning Chinese for over 8 years and still find it challenging? Overall, this video can give you many insights on how to learn Mandarin, why Chinese is so complicated, does speaking in the right tone actually matter, and also how to learn Mandarin better by knowing more Chinese culture. Now let's get started. Thank you very much for your time. Can you introduce yourself? Where are you from and how long have you been living in China?
So my name is Luigi, I'm from Belgium. I've been in Chengdu for 2 years now. And I used to study Chinese studies in Belgium, in a city called Leuven. Our second master year, we also were supposed to come study in China for a year. So that's how I ended up in Chengdu. I studied here for 1 year on a Chinese government scholarship. And I liked it so much that I stayed another year. I also make videos on YouTube, 小红书, Bilibili, and Instagram, 还有抖音. Yeah.
How many languages do you speak?
That's a good question because in Belgium, we are a country that has 3 official languages. 所以我们有法语、荷兰语还有德语. And I grew up in the 荷兰语区. In primary school already we start to learn French. Then in high school we also start to learn English. And I also had 3 years of German. When I went to university, I started to study Chinese.
Can you say so many different languages?
Okay. Bonjour, je m'appelle Luigi, je suis de Belgique, d'Anvers, et je parle un petit peu français. Ich spreche auch ein bisschen Deutsch, aber mein Deutsch ist nicht so gut. Dit is mijn Nederlands, dit is mijn moedertaal. 还有中文我也会说。
你識講廣東話？
我聽得懂，但是我還不會。
我唔信，我唔信你識聽。
這個我聽不懂。
我不相信你會聽。你覺得學中文最難的方面是哪一方面？
我覺得對於每一個外國人來說可能會不一樣，但是我個人覺得是近義詞。就比如說 like how to say I'm shocked， 中文裡可能有10多個方法。Like you can say 震驚、吃驚、大吃一驚、驚豔，還有什麼？
嚇我一跳。
震撼。嚇一跳. Like there's so many ways to say it. And that's not only for the word shocked, like that's for a lot of words. So I think the hardest part about learning Chinese is just realizing the fact that this is a language that's never gonna stop. Like you always find new ways to say things. 就是我也想强調一下 learning 的四聲 is so important. 我記得我學中文的第1年，我也會避免學4個聲調，因為我當時也覺得很麻煩。但是我學中文的第2年，我就意識到了，其實中文的四聲還是非常重要的。Like if you do not learn how to use the 4 tones, Chinese people are also not going to understand you, you know? And it's actually better, I think, sometimes to speak slower but with the right tones than to try to be very fast and use the wrong tones. You're going to sound better using the first method. I think another thing about what's very hard about learning Chinese is keeping yourself motivated. If you want to reach native speaker level, you're going to have to spend at least like a decade, I think.
Decade?
I mean, look at me. I've been studying for 8 years and I wouldn't say that I'm fluent. No, not at all. Like, I mean, I can communicate fluently, but I'm not nearly as fluent as you, for example. Like the words I use, the way I speak, it's still gonna be like a 外国人。就是中国人很容易可以听得出来我是一个外国人，对吗？
我觉得还有一个方面，就是你刚刚说的很好，就是我们用了很多词语，有很多种不同形容词。那如果你的中文是一个小学生的水平，可能你会用的很少。但如果你是成年人，就比如说像现在的00后，他们都很喜欢用网络用语。
So another thing I would say it's very difficult. It's like 成语。And a lot of people they tell me like, 哇，你会说这么多成语，但是 I actually counted it like last week. I think now I know about 250 to 300 Chengdu. And that's because 2 years ago I was in class and I noticed every time we came past a Chengdu, my mind was like, how 麻烦, you know, I don't want to learn this, so let me just skip it. I feel like a lot of foreigners, they might have the same idea because Chengdu, like, not only do you have to learn 4个字，你要学它的背景 like what is the 故事 behind it.
比如说画龙点睛、叶公好龙 this is like 故事。
对对对。And then besides that, you also have to know how to use them because every 成语它的用法也不一样。
Do you think in daily conversation Chinese people use a lot of 成语？
会的，会的。Because 2 years ago, I decided in that moment that I just told you about, like, from now on, every 成语 I see, like, I'm just gonna learn it, you know? Because I noticed, like, the fact that it's appearing so much means that it must be very important. And that's also something else I wanted to say. It's like, I think Chinese is a very cultural, rich language. It's a language that you cannot learn it thoroughly without also learning its culture and history because so many, like, 成语 and some expressions, they always have some cultural deeper meaning or some story behind it that was like important in history. Like, for example, 一夫当关万夫莫开. That's something you could use in daily life, but you have to know, like, where does this phrase come from and what does it mean.
So every time you learn a 成语, you actually write it down in a notebook?
If I have time, because lately I'm so busy, but I still have this goal that I want to learn all the 成语that people like you know. When watching movies, I just noticed that because I've been learning so many 成语, a lot of times I'm like, hey, that's a 成语I know. But another person might be like, oh, what? Like, has to look up the meaning and doesn't necessarily know it. And the more 成语you actually learn, it actually gets fun, you know? Like, now for me, it's something fun to do. I'm like, oh, that's a new 成语. Let me use that.
那你平时你会学写汉字吗？
会。从我第1年级的时候开始，我们已经会学怎么写字。
China has many dialects, many accents. A lot of even native Chinese people don't speak the correct tone.
Yeah.
Like as a foreigner, like you live in Sichuan, Sichuan has its own dialect. How do you navigate all these accents and stuff? You know?
Oh man, this is also like a very hard realization I had when I came to Chengdu. So I had been studying Chinese for 5 years already. And I was like, yeah, my Chinese is pretty decent. And I came to Chengdu and I was like, I cannot understand a word these people are saying, like taxi drivers. I mean, in normal stores, people will speak 普通话, but in general daily life, everyone here speaks Sichuanhua. So I was like, yeah, my Chinese sucks, you know? But then, like, because now I've been living here for 2 years, you start to pick up the local dialect, and once you learn the basics of the local dialect, it's much easier to integrate.
Do you actually pick up some Sichuanhua?
Yeah, a little bit like, 爪子嘛，刮袜子，
刮袜子，
老子数到3。
老子数到3。That's a good one. 当时搬来中国，为什么我们想来搬成都，而不是像北京、上海？
所以之前在比利时，我的专业是汉学，然后第5年我们要来中国上学1年，为了提升我们的汉语水平。然后我记得当时我们可以随机选一个中国的大学，当然我听说北大、浙大这些可以说顶级的学校嘛，但是我不想和中国的学霸们一起上学，就是在比利时也有很多中国的留学生，然后我也交了很多中国的朋友，所以我问他们，你们会推荐我在中国去哪里上学 ？To my surprise， 大多部分的朋友他们都说，你应该去成都。因为成都的节奏很慢，生活很舒服，很宜居，所以我就毅然决然就决定那我去成都上学嘛。
那你觉得生活在成都有什么优点？
成都其实它的优点还是蛮多的，就是众所周知，成都是一个很包容性的城市，但我觉得这不是一个刻板印象，这是真的，就是无论你是什么样的人，你在这里真的可以做你自己，没有人会批评或者判断你。也没有人会看不起你。然后第二呢，我觉得四川人也算是中国里面比较热情的人。虽然四川人也是中国可能最好奇的人，就是如果你是个外国人，他们在成都真的会定着看你。但是这是一种好奇的目光 ，It's not like a negative look, you know, it's just curiosity.
那成都有什么缺点？
第一，我觉得成都它没有其他的一些城市那么国际化，所以对于外国人来说，机会可能没有那么多。我觉得这也是成都的一个强项，因为成都它是一个很传统、很保守的城市，所以我觉得这里你真的可以感受到一个很正宗的中国的生活。然后还有一个缺点。肯定是雾霾，冬天的时候这里的雾霾比较多，但是主要是因为四川它在一个盆地里面，所以很多不好的空气它没有办法出去。还有一个缺点，虽然成都的美食特别多，但是很多的菜他们会带有辣椒油和花椒，然后我完全吃不惯花椒。The Sichuan pepper Like you either really like it or you just cannot 接受。
会不会让你肚子痛什么的？
肚子的话还可以，但对我来说就是味道太刺鼻了，然后那个麻的感觉我真的不喜欢。
我是广东人，我也吃不习惯，就是我偶尔吃一下可以，但是大多数时候我觉得太油了，
对，
我不能经常吃，
对，
或者会长痘痘。
对，但其实四川的家常菜就不完全是所有的菜很辣。It's mostly when you eat out, you will discover that it's too oily or too ma. But I recommend you to try like the homemade dishes as well. They're very good. 然后最后一个缺点是，你如果决定搬来四川，你最好也要学一点四川话 ，or you're not gonna be able to 活下去。
That is too hard. 这个太难了。
还可以吧。
So what makes you interested in learning Chinese?
我从小时候一直对中国，特别是就是亚洲的文化感兴趣。就是我记得我小时候在比利时有很多华裔开的中餐厅，然后我们每个周末就去一个中餐厅吃饭。我还记得我每次就会目不转睛地盯着看墙上的某一些长城或者香港的照片，所以从小时候我就慢慢的 started to like get interested in this Asian culture, especially like Chinese culture. And then when I was 8-9 years old, I started to play Pokemon cards, and I actually became the Belgian champion. I also had the chance to go participate in a World Cup in USA, which is where I met real Chinese, Japanese, and other Asian countries, like people from those countries. So that was like the first time I got this real culture shock, and I was really amazed, like, wow, these people are so different. So after that, my interest in Asia started growing more and more.
我很好奇当时为什么，因为你玩 Pokemon， 为什么不是日本而是中国？
我要去上大学的时候，我完全不知道我应该选什么专业。就最初，因为我也对日本的漫画很感兴趣，所以我在想我可不可以去学日语？然后我找到了一个叫日本学的专业。但是我当时在想日本已经很发达，就是将来可能没有那么多的机会，因为当时我们都会说，中国就是未来，你知道吗？所以我就在想，有没有什么可以学中文的专业？上课的时候我就在网上搜索了一下，然后我就找到了一个叫汉学的专业。So I just immediately knew like, okay, that's what I want to do. But I also need to add a little bit to the story. My interest for China was actually 潜移默化的, like really growing on me, because I also had a black friend in Belgium who I met in my football club, and he was someone who grew up in Yiwu.
Oh, wow.
So he's actually basically Chinese inside, you know?
That's random.
And after I met him, we became like best friends. We're still very good friends today. And yeah, he just sparked my interest in China even more. So that's why I immediately knew like, okay, I want to study Chinese.
有一句话就是中国人有时候说话的时候会很委婉。Do you think in general Chinese language is like a high context language? Like you have different meanings. 一句话有很多个意思。What do you think the difference like when Chinese people speaking in Chinese versus Europeans speaking in English?
Europe is still also a very diverse continent. Like not all countries are the same.
We're just generalizing.
Yeah, but if we generalize, I would say us Europeans were like more direct in a lot of ways, while in China, not everyone, but usually people are more 委婉. Like that's something I also had to figure out the hard way. Like people would maybe tell me like, oh yeah, we could think about it. That's a good idea. And we maybe will do that. But actually they're saying like, no.
Not interested in the moment.
Yeah, but me as like a 天真的外国人, I will be like, oh nice, they're gonna do it or something, you know?
Wow.
That's pretty funny, but yeah, it's interesting.
True.
You have to really be able to read between the lines, but it's something you learn while being in China.
Usually Chinese language, it has more deeper than just the surface. If you dive into it, there's like different meanings. Like, depends on the context or the vibe.
Yeah, I would think so, yeah. Okay.
那非常谢谢 Luigi。感兴趣的话可以关注 Luigi 的频道。
欢迎你们。也谢谢你。
Danke.
我的荣幸。
Alright, thank you for watching. If you want to follow Luigi's social media, I will list it in the video description. And if you want to learn Chinese, I've started a long-term partnership with Chinese Zero to Hero. It's founded by 2 Chinese people who are currently living abroad, so they know the real struggle of learning the second language. If you're interested, check it out in the video description. So my take to learn Mandarin is, if you don't live in a Chinese-speaking environment, then you should make yourself one. For example, listen to Chinese podcasts, watch Chinese TV shows, or personally I prefer watching documentaries, make Chinese friends, eating Chinese food, go work in a Chinese restaurant, etc. Wish you good luck again, and I'll see you in the next video.